today we've got something very interesting. Yeah, it caught my eye, then I dismissed it, but then when I looked again at it, I realized that it was definitely an older item in very good condition. So essentially what we have here is a computer which I've built. It is a legacy computer and the components are about 10 years old, older, about 14 years old, or roughly thereabouts. I think from 2006 or so. The case, on the other hand, is a Lian Li model number generic. Just imagine generic. Very nifty case. I was very pleased to be able to pick it up, and it's got a little lid to it, which is pretty cool. As you can see, I've done a little mod here. I've placed a 120mm. I've done a little mod here. I've placed a 120mm fan and a Blu-ray player attached. Of course, you can still use a Blu-ray player. They have approximately 50 gigabytes of space in those, so why not utilize them, you know, effectively. It's a Blu-ray DVD rewriter as well. I couldn't find a bracket for the 3.5 inch floppy, so I thought it fitting that we might as well leave the floppy in. Never know when something retro might come along if this is going to be a keeper build. On the other hand, there are two 80mm fans here which inject forward and intake. There's from the baseline here, there's braided edging which allows for intake underneath the case. I've taken out the cooler material there because it was quite degraded, surprisingly, even though the case looks very clean, and just left it as stock to allow for as much airflow as we can to go into the case per se. But keeping that in mind, these two 80mm have got a low, medium and a high setting as well, which is really cool. Manually switches just at the front side, and I don't know if you can notice, there's a couple of lines here which we're going to see how they activate. So remember, this case is 20 years old or thereabouts. I've seen a couple of modded varieties of this case which have perforation and holes front side here. They would have been a year or two later and they were 17 or 18 years of age already. So yeah, definitely a 20-year-old case. On the other hand, never was peeled, the Lian Li sticker. There's a couple of abrasions just here and here. From this, maybe adding a couple of rubber stoppers would have helped. Couple USB ports, and yeah, that's so far the front side of the Lian Li case. But where we get really interesting, so you know, modded up a little bit already. So very chic, straight lines. And something very interesting about her is that she's very, very progressive to work with, considering her age. Very progressive Lian Li was back in its day. Still are to this day. Provide items which I've noticed are very versatile and functional, and if there was gameplay involved in building a PC, gameplay ability would be through the roof for some of Lian Li's products. 20 years ago, they were ahead of their time. I don't know exactly how much this case is, but I've seen similar ones with the dial knobs, the front dial knobs and whatnot. We'll open it up, and again, she's completely aluminium on the inside here, which is very, very classy, and it doesn't seem to skimp out. It's brushed alloy. I didn't get the luxury of completely hiding the cables because of the power supply I utilized. I did have to build this ultimately with the leftover parts of what I had available for a build, but I've realized that I've left a little bit of clippage, a little tag here, so we'll get rid of that. So what you can see here is a continuation of the side there. Now the part that connects to the motherboard with the offsets on it, it actually has its own sort of type of offsets as well attached, which are really refreshing. Like, they're not just your basic type. They're already going out of their way On top of this, to prove that you have all your bolts, and they're the type that you can unscrew with your hands, and very good quality, very shiny, that matches the case per se. If you take 1, 2, 3, 4 off, you can pull this completely out with the motherboard. So obviously, depending on how you got things connected, you've got the luxury of not only connecting up the motherboard, but also the cooler, the RAM, and everything else, and just literally slotting it in, rather than having to deal with the power supply, which is in this case on the top side, where putting a cooler in would be very difficult and fiddly, and even the CPU headers themselves to power the CPU, sometimes you find very tricky to put in. The motherboard that we use here does require an A-pin, and it would have been very fiddly as well. So it worked out in our favor. Unfortunately, haven't got the IO shield. I lost the IO shield somewhere for this motherboard specifically, that we'll get to in a second. But yeah, and then the piece de resistance, you have to remember this is 20 years of age, so it's got an exhaust here as well. So what we'll do, we'll put the lid back on one side here. So again, completely decent clamps that go in on both sides, and not just your generic little ones which are just going to add in the, and there's no flex in this, you know what I mean? It's very solid. Love the way it almost just slides in as well. So not to speak lightly of this PC, it can still handle itself in some light gaming as well, which is really surprising for its age. And a couple of different approaches to it regarding upgrades would give it, you know, a little bit more oomph and a lot more longevity, if inclined to pursue that sort of a route. So as I turn her around, you'll get a semblance of what then caught my eye as well. Ooh. Lian Li, you outdid yourself. Got like one of the first Windows bloody PCs I've ever noticed or seen. Windows PC cases, 20 years of age and very well constructed. So on top of that, even the back plating on the PSU comes off to allow the PSU to slide back and forward instead of just forward. And if you've ever experienced any of these PSUs in that regards, I mean these cases, I beg your pardon, in that regards, of that age, you didn't have that functionality in form. So very pleasing case to building, surprisingly, for its age. It's a mid-tower in essence, and it fits a full-size ATX board in it with the 7 PCI slots available. So very functional and surprisingly very easy to work with. There's a little light touch of blue there, which is, you know, adds a nice touch. And again, sturdy construction and just in slots very nicely. Now, if we get into the nitty gritty, so if we get in a little closer, so we've got an Asus GTX 285, which has only got 1 GB of DDR3 memory in it. That is coming up to a fair amount in age now, I believe about 10 years of age. This will still run things on low. So the cool thing about her is she's got space for what you'd use nowadays, about 10 hard drives if need be. This, on the other hand, again, you've got the 2 bolts here, which are thumb screwed. It will allow you to unplug everything here, per se, and just slide the bottom 5 hard drives out, essentially. That's all you have to do. And it's slide it in, slide it out, which for a 20-year-old case is unbelievable. It can be your miniature server at home. Little touches here where they didn't exactly bezel it correctly. they've covered it up, so it's very classy, very well done. Otherwise, it's very clean as well. No scratching in that regards. Yeah, very, very pleased in the end to build in this case. And so with that being said, let's discuss the componentry. Got a GPU in there, very brick, basically a brick shithouse. GTX 285, 1GB DDR3. Going to see how she performs in this day and age in 2020. 10-year-old GPU, 20-year-old case, 2010-20 performance review time. On top of that, it's got the board itself, it's got 4 DIMMs and filled up with 2GB each of a total of 8GB of DDR2 RAM. So it's a little bit lower on the spectrum, but it has been buffered up and overclocked ever so slightly, and is running at 1600 megahertz FSB alongside 800 megahertz DIMM modulation RAM speed as well. So it's good enough for DDR2 be DDR2 and how it used to be. With the 8, it was definitely needed to fill it completely out, because we are running Windows 10 now on the operating system. On the other hand, the drives themselves, we have 4 drives. I had to make the best of what I had available, so I only had a couple. I had a 100GB drive, I had 2 160s, and I thought, what can I do with this? Luckily, the motherboard itself has the option to do RAID and RAID 0 and whatnot, so I combined them and made a bootable drive, which was really good, with a slight performance increase as well. These are all 7200 RPM drives, and not being 5400 at the very least, they are all HDD spindle drives, but there is a performance boost of about 33% from your 5400 to your 7200. It's something to take note of, plus the performance boost in itself of the RAID array itself. On top of that, I did find another 500 gig drive, which I wasn't going to put together with the others. So that's a separate drive, especially for the case. So there's approximately a terabyte of space in this PC of just makeup parts which I had lying about, and just the best way to utilize them. So what allowed us to RAID array and do this, what sort of board was it? Well, it's an old XFX board. And XFX back in the day was something special. XFX SLI 780, I believe, I board. So it can run 3 or tri configuration of GPUs. I was intentionally trying to do this build with a couple of gigabyte graphics cards. Unfortunately, they weren't compatible, and also Windows currently with the board itself hasn't got the compatibility and availability to get SLI initiated. So I had to make do with my next best graphics card lying about, or my best graphics card lying about that's going to be single-handedly put into the case, into this build. And yeah, so we've done that. On the other hand, the board itself was hell. Something you might want to notice, I did do a customized, almost like a Wraith cooler, which is really cool. And as you can see, it's got bolts which can be screwed in, and it's very convenient for this, which is a 775 socketed motherboard. So all those old 775 socketed chips that you've got, it can utilize, and it can work quite well with. It does have a dump of a heatsink and going from the north to the south bridge, and also active cooling on it itself, which is logoed by NVIDIA and whatnot. Cool thing on top of this, there was so much I could do with the cabling situation, unfortunately. And this is obviously, if it was all black and that, you wouldn't even notice it. But it's the best I could do considering I've got clear airflow through here, clear airflow through here as well. The GPU being a blower style. We'll take it intake and exhale. On the other hand, the exhaust here and the power supply doubles as an exhaust as well. That will go straight out over here. Then we've got considerably good airflow in a case, again, that is 20 years of age at a time where people were still waiting for Cooler Master to come out with what honestly was very generic in appearance, but very effective in cooling. But yeah, realistically, it was a nightmare to get this XFX board posting for the first time, to be brutally honest. So many problems that I had to work through. The pins were actually stuffed. One of the last things that I had to realize was the case that was wrong with it. A BIOS chip. Yes, a BIOS chip needed to be impressed about 1/4 of a millimeter. But there was other reasons as well. The bad RAM, DDR2 that was shonky, DDR2 that wasn't compatible, bad configurations. Was it the DIMM? Was it not? It didn't matter. Was it something worked, something didn't, and it works there, but it doesn't work there. And it was just a continual nightmare. The socket pins were bent. It wouldn't post up. It wouldn't fire up. It wouldn't then show. It went multiple error codes. So it does have a digital display, which will bump out an error code for you. And not all error codes are very specific as well, which is very annoying. So it does aid you in troubleshooting, but trying to find that old school manual as well was a task and a half. Yeah, it was interesting, it was fun, and I'm very glad that I brought it back to life again, and it's fixed and running really smoothly, been rejuvenated and regenerated in a way. Let's turn her on. Let's pack her back up together and turn her on and see how she fires, guys. Alrighty, so without a moment's notice longer, let's see how she operates today, considering all the work we went into this XFX board. XFX SLI 780i has the ability of 3 SLI or tri-SLI with 3 graphics card GPUs simultaneously run over about a 14-year-old board, 10-year-old graphics card, 20-year-old Lian Li case, and we'll see how she operates with Windows 10 just using spindle drives in this day and age. Everything in great condition. So we've gotten a blue light to come up straight away, which is good. It signifies goodness for us. I'm going to initiate the monitor because it's a newer style monitor. Sometimes there are iffies. Hopefully there isn't an issue regarding starting her. So we shall turn her on, and looks like she's going to go on instantaneously, which is good. So it will take a split second because I have it always checking through all the processes. It's detecting the arrays and whatnot, rather than skipping through them, especially with older PCs. I find it more worthwhile and needed, so that just in case anything that is corrupted gets picked up before you have a chance of doing more damage and whatnot. So we've got a little bit of lightage now, which is really cool over here. And then if we have a look over here, I shit you not, is that RGB? That is RGB. I mean, it's not too much of it, and the light, there's a white light behind, but have a look at the RGB. For a 20-year-old case, that was actually put in there originally. Blue light subsequently I thought was a fitting finish in that sense. So I do keep this ever so slightly open as well, because you want to let it breathe as much as possible. That GPU will notoriously get hot. So there isn't as much argy-bargy as you'd expect, but the motherboard does pound out enough. So we've got an FF there, so that signifies that it's gone through the post and gone through everything, because it cycles through certain checks, and if it lands on FF, it means it's done and it's all good. And you probably will get into whatever operating system you've got loaded up, ready to roll. So we're into Windows and just basic functionality. Doing things like opening that was pretty decent and responsive. Let's open taskbar depending on how many functions you've got. 1, 2, right there, it's open. So we'll load up, we'll open our notifications. There is a slight delay there. All settings sometimes takes a split second longer, but that seems to be operating really well. On a side note, what we'll do is we'll open up Cinebench R15 if necessary. But for example, first things first is we can see an OpenGL run, which is on Cinebench R15. So it does take a second for it to prepare, and it will render the image, and hopefully it'll be accurate enough to proceed forward with the run. And yes, it is. So I apologize for the shonky camera work there. So we got our run, and what do we get? We got just under 70 frames per second with our what is essentially a overclocked 775 socketed Q9650 CPU. It's got 4 cores and 4 threads, and it's overclocked to a stable overclock of 3.6 gigahertz as well. So that's paired with our GTX 285 1 gigabyte graphics card. So 70 frames per second. It was the highest as well, and a couple of better, less bottlenecked systems ran only ever so slightly higher. So it does take a second to load up. Once it's in, it's starting off, which I actually thought I was already in, so I wasn't paying attention. Lol, stupid me. Yeah, we can see it in the tile section, you know, cobblestones and whatnot. So yeah, she's doing it. She's definitely doing it. On the other hand, the heat emitting from the GPU is about 72 degrees. That is standard for a GPU of that caliber from that age. The GTX 480 could run up to 100 degrees at the very least, and it could fry an egg. So it was something to marvel at if you ever fried an egg on your GPU. But benchmarking wise, we'll let it run through, and we'll see our score, and we'll see where it sort of stacks up. Appearance wise, it seems like it's running at approximately 22 frames at the moment, 23, hitting 30s and whatnot. Also, you know, max frame rates at the moment about 36 frames. Yeah, behold, because essentially something like that running at 30 frames is rivaling consoles of yesteryear. In this day and age, it can still play your MOBAs and whatnot, as well as, you know, your esport games like CSGO and that. Depending on what settings you put it at, obviously everything will have to be low in that sense, but it doesn't mean it won't perform well enough to actually have a decent amount of play. The value is, you know, in this computer is certain things like the nostalgia and the effects that you can get from the board itself, the Lian Li case and how good a condition it is, and how will function over form, even though the form factor is very elegant as well. Years later, still it took time for other manufacturers to catch up regarding the style in that sense. Very, very pleasing to work in, and yeah, like look at it go. Like, you know, these are just bits and pieces and parts I've just got lying about, which essentially I've brought together into something that, you know, I don't want to say it, but maybe $300 to $500 depending on the person and how it's factored in. I've got a couple of other drives, couple other two 500 gig drives, so that's 3 500s. I might, for permanency's sake, do a 1.5 terabyte drive in it, and it would be RAID as well instead. And that would be the boot drive as well as the running drive. Why not? And speed-wise, read and writes, what I'll do is I will stop it, and we'll see what sort of read and write speeds we've got regarding these spindle drives. So that's something to of interest that might be to some of you as well. Crystal Mark to get the sequential read and write speeds, and at the moment I think we've got some background apps also running and whatnot, because I'll tell you right now, 123 is not what I was getting, and I did it about 2 or 3 times or 3 or 4 times. but it's close to. In theory, if you do the math, you should be able to get about 240 megabits a second, but I was getting about close to 150 or 140 on the average. So here we can see the clock speeds, and they are moving ever so much, so that's a cool thing. On the other hand, memory wise, we've got dual channel 8 gigabytes. DRAM frequency seems to be suggestive of 400 megahertz here, although in actual fact it's 800 megahertz that the RAM is currently clocked at. You know, function wise, it seems to be, you know, just like your normal PC in that. What we'll do is we've got that running, but we'll open up Chrome. So how long does it take? Okay, so a split second longer than it should, but it's loading up an image as well, which I've got, which is pretty decently chunky. If there was a bit of tearing there, moving it around, she's she's pretty quick. So let's hit YouTube, for example. Okay, so remember, internet wise as well, but we got get it up and running under a load. We won't really worry about the score and the background apps that are running in that, which may affect it as well. It is only a 4-core processor, but she does she bolts through it. I wouldn't say she guns through it, but she definitely bolts through it. At 3.6 gigahertz, it's not overly slow in that sense. But what we do have here is some temperatures, and at 3.6 we've just hit 60 degrees. I'd say there will still be some leg room to maneuver if the availability was to overclock this PC, the CPU further was available. Unfortunately, it can only really be done by manipulating the RAM in this case, regarding this CPU. I might have an unlock multiplier on this CPU on another board, which I'm considering doing sooner rather than later, and that one will go through all our old 775 socketed CPUs, and we'll see we've got a gem. Looking at temperatures, 64 degrees we've got them to at one stage, and where it's not going to climb any higher than that, I'm guessing. 100% CPU utilization. So and we are coming to the end of the run now, so obviously our score will be affected and it won't be as high as it could without running other applications and whatnot. So for accuracy's sake, it's slightly lower than what we had before, and I had apps running back then. But 775Y socketed, coming back to what I was mentioning, I'll be using a gigabyte board in the future, which is got an amazing BIOS on it, frankly, and allows for the manipulation of all those 775s to the nth degree. It's just a miniature ITX board as well. It only takes a couple of DIMMs, DDR2, unfortunately, even though this CPU can take DDR3, for example, as well. So I've got my overclocking special back in the day DDR2 HyperX Furies in that sense, but not Furies, you know. These are golden to me. These are like, you see certain people got certain RAM for certain things. This is the RAM, guys. Like, I mean 2.2 volts, you know, 2.2 volts minimum. There's the rundown of the PC. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Look, no error codes now. Whoever chucked it out. Awesome, eh? She's a very pretty, elegant case to work in as well. And I'm glad I got the privilege to build in it when I didn't get the luxury 20 years ago. So this is Robbie from Astrotech Computers. Peace out, guys.